So jumping back in, I'm going to change the subject just to share something you mentioned, which is kind of close to my heart in your lecture a while ago, is about you did this debate at Oxford on promiscuity. My area, like I said, is hooking up and promiscuity. I'm of the belief that just as asexuality is a orientation, that promiscuity is an orientation. But it's not a popular opinion, and everyone's like they don't want to believe that.
I could go there.
But so tell me about this debate so you went. I just imagine you like rolling up with a bunch of, because it was in England, and Oxford's like people with like powdered wigs and black robes, and you're arguing about promiscuity, and you're like in a, I don't know, not in that.
Well, the true part of that fantasy, which is a very nice fantasy, is that it was in a room where people used to dress like that and argue things. It was in a very old room that the Oxford Union has been using for debates for a long time.
A lot of dark wood.
It's more like a chapel than like a room in a hotel where you usually have, panels and debates and things.
Like you say the word sex, and they're like.
I got invited by the president of the Oxford Union to take part in a debate entitled "This House Believes That Promiscuity is a Virtue, Not a Vice."
Oh.
And there were 2 or 3 pro-promiscuity people and 2 or 3 anti-promiscuity people. And as you would expect, anti-promiscuity people included sort of conservative feminist with some religion on top, and religionists.
Right.
And I quipped that we lost because the campus religious organization came out en masse, but that really is sort of what happened. Who knows how it would have gone otherwise, because I thought we were very convincing. But when I think about promiscuity, I really do think, as I was saying in my remarks, about what access to knowledge do most people get that gives them more diverse information than promiscuity? Not so much. Promiscuity is a form of assuaging sexual curiosity. It's a form of sex education.
Right.
Might not be a optimal one, but it is one, I think. And I think many people use it that way. And the more fluidly promiscuous, especially when you said you feel like it's an orientation, I think that there are people who start out pretty promiscuous, gather themselves some data, and then dial it in. And then there are some people who are like, this promiscuity thing, this is great. This is my thing.
Like variety is your thing,
Right.
Which leads me to all the other things, right? If you do it properly. But the other thing that I think is significant, I really think that a strong piece of my sex-positive base of looking at all kinds of other people and going, that's your thing, huh? Okay. Comes from going out and meeting the people and having them say what they like, and this in the context both of sex work and also just of trying to answer my own questions about sex. And that's not how everybody takes it, I know. Some people live in their promiscuity in a shame space.
Yeah.
Right? Or in a, I don't know, I'll have to get really drunk to do this space, which might be related to a shame space, depending on how you think about it.
Or you're a swinger.
Or you're a swinger, which means, well,
you were talking about getting drunk.
I think that there are there are ways in which swingers get a bad rap. But what I want to say is that this business of you can only do it in 2x2, like on the arc, that shapes things in a particular way for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
So, and I think probably there are a few people out there who, when I said arc, got really mad at me. I didn't mean to make you mad, but whatever. That was my intent.
Those animals were on the ark for a long time. I'm sure there was a lot of that going on.
Was there a zebra to begin with? I think a zebra walked off. Did they walk on?
Right, exactly.
I don't really know. Don't.
Okay, so this question I came up with, a while ago, when we first learned that you were going to be on, and it's based on your lecture, and it fits right in. It's kind of it's not a devil's advocate question, but it's more it's a sociological question, and you're probably going to pick it out real fast. So as social forces happen, right, we get all these information. That's kind of what cultivates our sexuality in a lot of ways. Messages from other places, these institutions and things like that. A lot of it says, especially for women, you know, as you said, we have a sex negative society. Women should be chaste, and you know, should save themselves for marriage, and that's kind of the overall theme. That it's dying, thankfully, but that's still prevalent in a lot of parts of especially this country.
But they should be pretty cute when they go to work, though.
Right. So
But not too cute.
So there's this orgasm gap, right?
Yeah.
That happens. Well, of course, as we talked about, most of it's on college students, and there's an orgasm gap in college. Fine. In my research, I found that lessens as people get older because of a lot of social things. Like, you don't care as much, right? You don't care what your body looks like while you're being fucked at that angle. Like, you're not worried about it, and you're not in your head.
Right.
So women tend to orgasm a little more. Men tend to slow down and be more attentive. So it's both and, you know. So you're getting all these messages about how you're not supposed to seek out pleasure from all these other institutions. And lately, in the past 10, 20 years, we've started to see this rise of messages saying you should be orgasming.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's this popularity of this like orgasm push. Do you think that has a negative influence, that suddenly it's like, well, I should be orgasming, which creates anxiety that you should be doing this, which often inhibits that from happening?
Well, I don't think I would use the word negative, but I would say that depending on where a person's coming from, it certainly can add pressure.
Sure.
And sometimes it adds pressure from the direction of a partner. The old, did you come?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to keep doing this till you come. Oh, please don't keep doing that.
Right.
I'm going to come for
Right.
that.
Right.
I mean, I feel like there's a fair amount of just assumption about, this plays into the normative question too.
Yeah.
Like what's normative? What are we supposed to be doing here? Supposed to be, not what do we want to be doing here? Did we figure out something we both want to be doing that we both enjoy?
Yeah.
Because that might be good. Instead, there's this notion that any of us of any gender and probably any age range, although I really buy that younger people are most in the space of not having gotten enough either good information or life experience and, you know, fluidity to get somewhere else than where they have gone by the time they're 19 or 20.
Right.
Sure.
So I think there's a way in which this sex isn't valuable unless you orgasm leaves many people out.
Yep.
Honestly, I really love the sound of trains. It's so hot.
Our viewership knows the train by now.
Bet they do. Bet they do. And something about the pressure to orgasm leads into this super common problem. I call it the squirrel wheel, although mostly you don't put squirrels on wheels. But if you did, they would run on the wheel,
Right.
like sort of monkey mind in meditation space, where you're thinking too much, and it takes away from your sensate focus and your ability to go into the bodily experience that you've set yourself up to go into if you're being sexual.
Right.
And it's perfectly possible that if you don't know very much about sex, the bodily experience isn't one that's going to be very successful, like, you know, intercourse for so long without enough arousal to start with, that the intercourse is just not going to be a successful
Right.
Orgasm act, and it might not have been very fun anyway because of the not enough arousal. But that means the problem isn't the orgasm. The problem is the arousal. You know, the thing that we should be talking about more, I think, is arousal, because a lot of people don't understand the role of arousal as a necessary step toward, for most people, a necessary step toward orgasm. And arousal is what makes the sex fun in the first place. So whether or not you have an orgasm, you still feel like you had a nice, pleasurable experience,
Right.
as opposed to doing some kind of an athletic wrestle that didn't quite take, which sex can sometimes feel like too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't. My mind was going when you were talking about that. So I can imagine someone listening to the show and arguing with you that no, this is just propaganda from the pleasure industry saying that you should seek out these things for orgasm, but buy this product first, because it'll help you. Yeah.
Well, for some people, buying a product first or getting a gift of one on Valentine's Day or whatever is the technology, is the life hack, let's call it. What kids are calling life hacks these days. It's the life hack that gets a person over the fear and almost the identity for some people. Like, I remember this from when I was a pup. Like, I didn't think I could have an orgasm. I would just tell partners, oh, I can't come, so don't worry about it. Let's just do whatever we're going to do. And then, of course, I didn't have an orgasm except until I did. Yay!
Wow.
But I took the pressure off myself.
Right.
And if I didn't, then I went into that mind space where it's never going to work. But the knowing that you can have an orgasm can be a positive step. Going all into sex toy world means you have to learn a little bit about how to do it differently with another human. And, we hear about that a lot in the pleasure products industry too. I still can't have an orgasm with my boo. I only have it with my vibrator. It's like, well, then you're still on a path. And I hope that the path takes you exactly where you need to go with this.
And I've seen some research showing that happens as women get older. They need more and more intense stimulation, more direct stimulation,
intense stimulation,
right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that can certainly be the case. And sometimes I think, the thing about a vibrator is it's got enough sort of sensate power to move you faster, closer to an orgasmic state that in a partner sex configuration often would take a lot of negotiation and trying some stuff out and getting comfortable enough. And as I often say, your partner, one of the things that makes masturbation a good step in this whole discussion, whether or not there's a vibrator involved, is your partner is a distraction, an awesome distraction.
Right.
A distraction you want in the room with you, we sure hope. A sexy distraction, but you're especially, I think, people raised as women, but I think other people too, often concentrate on what they think the interface is supposed to be. And it's not always easy for somebody to just say, no, I wanted this exactly, this, don't stop, don't move, don't do the kind of talk that you sometimes have to get somebody to go into with you in order to get your thing to happen. Many people don't think that's romantic. Many people don't think that's natural.
Think it's sexy, right?
Yeah, but if you're supposed to be together, it's just going to happen. It's like, if you're supposed to be together, you two will figure out how to get comfortable with each other. That's what, if you're going to boil it down to that, and this, this gets shoveled into the romance, my one and only, my other half, the one. I do lots of interviews with the press, as I said, and this year it's all been about how do you know it's the one?
Oh, wow.
Like, what if there's more than one?
Yeah, I don't know the mainstream media wants to have a conversation about that so much.
Not so much.
Yeah.
But some are more open to it than others.
That's good.
So what advice would you give to partners then? We talked about that this we'll say the drive for pleasure, the drive for arousal and orgasm. Might have kind of this manifest effect on partners of, especially if their partner who is orgasming, I'm going to do this. This is going to happen because we're supposed to do this. And suddenly the impetus is then often put on the partner to make that happen.
Sure.
So what advice would you give to a partnership or that other partner to be like, to kind of think about that or negotiate it or what have you?
Well, as I said, using porn as sex ed is like using car chase movies as driver's ed. And they're exciting and they're valuable sources of entertainment. And so just as porn is not all that must be known of sex ed. I mean, when you talk about sex, what is sex? So many people think that sex is a pretty basic set of activities and behaviors, culminates in intercourse. Intercourse can be awesome, but I would say to partners, switch up all the different ways that you can think of to do it. Mm-hmm. Get comfortable asking your partner what they like and what they want, and if they don't know, encourage them to let you know when something's good, because we're collecting, especially if we're trying to build a long-term or even a medium-term, pretty deep one-on-one relationship with somebody. We got to find out what they respond to, and this whole notion that there's a way that we respond. Well, we don't all respond that way. Mm-hmm. And I want partners to know that. I think that's the biggest thing, really. Mm-hmm. Like, let's switch it up. Let's explore. And let's make sure that the person that we're putting our efforts into having fun with can say what is their experience.
Who's responsible for orgasm?
Well, I have a fantasy that in my copious spare time, I'm going to start a movement among porn people to everybody who's got a clit touches it during intercourse in porn, to normalize the activity. I think the person whose body is going to orgasm is ultimately responsible, but if they're having sex with another person, it's a dance. Mm-hmm. Which means that if they're responsible, then maybe they want to give some information to the person who's, upside down pile driving or whatever it is that they're doing. And
that's really hard to do.
Yeah.
You have to have a couch that's not going to move, or like something stationary.
You can break your toe if your couch moves. I just want, we talk about safe sex and we act as though it has to do with barriers.
With condoms.
It has to do with a lot of different things, and that's one of them. Yep. But I think that a prevailing notion is that the person who's moving their hips the fastest is the one that's responsible for orgasm. Right. And I just think that that's a little more mechanistic than most people will find ultimately workable. Mm-hmm. Especially if, like, two people who are really hot for each other, whose bodies move right together, might have had no sex education whatsoever, but if the chemistry is up, mm-hmm. boom, everybody has a great time. Mm-hmm. And if you go and get 3 degrees, you can get stuck in the middle, right? Yeah. I mean, it's never only about information, but I think it's about comfort in being swept up into sensation, mm-hmm. and turning the brain off and letting the body respond the way bodies often, if not always, are wired mm-hmm. to respond.
Main argument for promiscuity. I'd love to hear this.
My main argument for promiscuity is that it encourages understanding of sexual diversity and fellow feeling when it happens in a positive context.
This is what you threw at them?
Yes. It is a social skill builder around sexuality that has very few peers, in my opinion. Because if you go out and have a good time as a promiscuous person, you learn how to communicate with a variety of other kinds of people. And then if you ever do decide to settle down with one person, if that works out, if that's what you want, if that's what happens, at least you've got some communication skills, and you know that there's more than one thing mm-hmm. that you're talking about when you're talking about sex. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Unless you've only ever asked for that one thing when you went out and were promiscuous, in which case you were probably quite charming.
Mm-hmm. I have a question. How do you, and we'll wrap up here in just a second, how do you think this idea of promiscuity and getting those sexual experiences in to help better understand yourself and communicate with others affects the idea of what we're hearing sometimes in the sex worker community about the difference in value between people with penises and people with vaginas? How do you think that promiscuity affects that idea that's I don't know if it's a new idea or not. It seems new to me, but how do you think it affects that idea?
Well, I think that there's a different kind of valuation often given to people with penises versus vaginas in a context of sort of being a sexual person outside the corral.
Okay.
And that part of why it's worth my pulling out these kinds of ideas about promiscuity. I mean, you notice I didn't just say because people deserve to have sex with anybody they want to and all the pleasure they can manage to have in their lives, which I don't think is a bad answer either. But the thing that I think that is I think that people who have mixed or negative feelings about promiscuity assume that that's what promiscuous people are out doing. Possibly true. But they don't go into I think they're learning to be better communicators and more accepting of diversity in the world. And I think that is one of the things that we're also doing when we're going out. And again, I just want to say, I don't think everybody should be promiscuous. I just think that there are plenty of people who are. And one of the things I'm doing is trying to put a through line that's not a shame-based through line into this behavior. Because particularly people with vaginas or people who identify as women regardless of how their trans or cis status or their non-binary status even will get a different kind of attitude from outside and to continue to be. I mean, it's not the same as, but it's comparable in some ways in its effect to homophobia and the whole narrative about how gay men are just promiscuous. That makes a lot of people feel as though they're not living in their body and their sexuality the right way. It's why we need a slut walk.
Right.
When most sluts know how to walk already, but and does that really matter? No, that's not even the first thing you need to know how to do if you're a slut.
Right.
I still feel like there's a threshold for most people of that level of too much, and it is hard to break through that. And I feel like promiscuity is the last legal taboo bastion, right?
Legal, yeah.
Legal,
maybe so.
Legal. And you're right. I think people, much like you mentioned in your talk, people throw the stigma and the shame because of fear. Often, in my take, from a lot of the public health framework, that they're just disease ridden. They're spreading.
Right.
The same way they talk about sex workers.
Sex workers, bisexual men.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's hard to break through that. I've seen, you were talking about that women will get different kind of stigmas, but I feel like in the research I've seen that's changing. But it's not changing for the better. It's that they're now just judging men the same way. It's not that women are we're liberalizing. No. It's that now it's no one can have a lot of sex anymore.
Right.
And admittedly, we've seen.
But they haven't legislated promiscuity away yet.
Yeah, but as we've seen with the young people, they're not having as much.
They
sex.
are not having as much sex, right?
It's really alarming.
Yeah,
but I feel like there's even though they have all this technology at hand to have this anonymous sex and to get access to people to be promiscuous,
right.
They're just not.
Right, and sex-positive culture does something that supports anything from promiscuity to asexuality, which is it gives us more tools to talk about it. It normalizes it as part of the range of what people do, and it helps destigmatize and heal shame around things. And And this is one of the problems with sex positive culture turning into, woo-hoo-hoo-hoo, we're having this sex.
Right.
Because there's this supportive and illustrative and even remedial piece that I want everyone who goes out and has all the sex to have access to, including the people who don't have all the sex, who still need to deal with people macking on them, and to be able to explain their state and their preferences and their boundaries to one another, so that more people get the message that not everyone wants to have all the sex all the time. There's this thing that I've been fighting with in my brain as I try to think about how to talk about these issues, and I don't feel like I'm quite there yet, but it interests me so much that there really appears to be some group of people who are now being often sort of labeled as predators and stuff, who I think are not living the social skills of the moment and projecting desire in other people that they feel, and figuring that everybody just like want to do all the things. No, nothing wrong with doing all the things, nothing wrong with not doing all the things. And we've got to figure out a way to make it more normalized, that we understand. That's probably the only time I'll ever use the word normalized seriously in my life, that we all understand that we can't assume what other people want until we get into the mix where we're getting either really good body language that we know how to read, some people do, and some people don't.
And that's a problem.
Or can't
like
talk.
For someone like me who's an Aspie, being able to read people is something I've had to learn over the course of my lifetime by looking at it mathematically. So if there's no opportunity for that kind of interaction to begin with, that learning is just interrupted. So, yeah.
But as we've talked about, and as David Lay has mentioned, that a lot of what you're getting at is, I may be putting this out here of like this is what I meant, or like my sexual attraction towards you, or what have you, but your hang-ups, for the lack of a better term, aren't written above your head. So a lot of times that could trigger one of your hang-ups or your trauma or something like that, and suddenly I've stepped on a landmine.
That I'm not aware that's there.
That you're not aware it's there, and suddenly it's an explosion.
Right.
But I want people to know it's complicated.
Yes.
Because that is a positive thing.
Right, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree completely.
exactly. Yeah, and
Yes.
that's something that we talk about a lot. Is sometimes I think it's okay to stumble over that stuff because that's how we learn.
Yeah.
Right, especially people with Asperger's or any kind of autism spectrum or whatever, they have to stumble on that stuff to learn it to begin with. So I agree with you both that that's a really important way to learn how to negotiate, how to be sexual with other people, and how to be intimate with other people, both not just sexually but emotionally and otherwise. You have to make mistakes sometimes.
Right. I feel like you need to make mistakes often. In a way, not in a way that's dangerous or it's going to cause harm.
Right.
That's not going to cause harm because it is a skill that requires cultivation. It's
And
not
practice,
something that's
right.
innate. And I feel like that's what we're running into with some of this, of people not being able to negotiate that. Suddenly, just like you were at your party, you're being shamed for not being open, and suddenly someone else is being shamed, or there's this negative confrontational reaction because you don't know my triggers, and rather than us sitting there and talking about it and neither of us shaming each other or being upset about it, or understanding why you're upset about it,
Right.
that, as a key too,
Yeah.
we're just throwing our hands up and just getting mad at each other, and suddenly there's an incident.
Yeah.
But you're right, so when it
And the opposite of connection.
right so I guess we find that connection in the complicated is what you're getting at.
Because if it's not complicated, then it's simple. And we know it's not.
Right. Yeah.
or it's boring.
Nor do we need to make it simple. I mean, that's I in a way that's one of the things that I think this normative notion about what, sort of heteronormative and it's just normative notion of sex seeks to do is like sort of brush off all the difference,
the complexity and the nuance, right?
and the kinks and the fetishes and the things that make us unique from one another. And I mean, I guess there are people out there who don't think it's cool that there are lots of different kinds of people around sex or any other thing, but I don't know. I like knowing that I am one sexual person in a field of difference. There's a way in which this is associated too, I think, with people assuming that they're going to feel judged. When you were talking about the promiscuity thing, the other thing that I've heard talked about, and this was when I was asked doing a question and answer column where somebody got in really bad trouble with their partner when their partner asked them how many people they'd had sex with.
Number.
They
The number.
answered
Right.
thinking, well, my loving partner has asked me a question. I'll just be honest.
Right.
I'm not suggesting don't be honest. I'm just suggesting that went off the rails.
Wow.
And it, I think, went off the rails because there's this people more promiscuous than me are going to judge me for my skills or lack thereof. They're going to compare me. They're going to... And I don't know what to say to that, except that it's poor form to compare people that
Sure.
way. That's not really nice. And if we could make space for this to be a form of information gathering, it might feel a little better to people.
Because,
Fun having
yeah.
to, sure, but
Right, but I find that people that are promiscuous are less likely to judge you on your performance. Like yes, the person
Yeah.
who has had less sex, they're like, oh, you're judging me because you've had so many people. You're like, no, I've had so many people. It's like I just want to enjoy this.
I just want to enjoy this.
I just want to
moment.
enjoy this. I don't
Yeah.
want to.
Yeah.
I'm not analyzing. Like
Yeah.
it,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
yeah, maybe it's one of these situations where, like, when I find non-sex workers sort of projecting onto what it must be like to be a sex worker, they think about what it would be like if they were sex workers and how they would respond, right? Rather than understanding that not everybody would respond that way.
Right.
And maybe it's like that. Maybe the person is like, if I were promiscuous, I would be.
Right.
I would make a flow chart. Everyone. I did go to a party once where everybody. Did they get lined up by hand size or penis size? By hand size.
Wow.
Yeah. So I mean, people can play these little games if they want to. It's fun, but
Sure.
but there's something about being with your person, however many people they've been with before, and trying to understand what it means to them. Not projecting, trying to get it, and understanding that there may need to be a little bit of putting the two experiences together and trying to suss things out. And all of this stuff should just be part of how we talk about sexuality all the time from sex ed on.
Yeah.
Maybe not the line people up by hand size, but
But I will admit that as a self-proclaimed promiscuous person, which is not news to anyone who knows me, if I meet with someone who has very few partners, let alone someone who's never had sex. I'm almost 40. That doesn't really happen very often. But because I don't have sex with teenagers, or 18, 19-year-old people, or even 20s. But if they have not a lot of experience, I'm really hesitant to be sexual with them.
because you don't want to be an e-ticket ride.
Maybe, but it's so judgy, and I own it. It's judgy as hell. I get it, but like, just as I understand the stigma coming towards me, like I throw out some like underlying shame. It's not like if I talking to somebody, say on Tinder or Bumble or something like that, and it's like oh yeah, no. If that question comes up, first off, I never ask it. But they're like, no, I don't really have a lot of experience. I'm like, so this was fun. Come back to me in a couple years after you've, earned your black belt in whoring around, and then we'll have a
Oh my
conversation.
god! Oh my goodness!
No, but you know what I mean.
I do, and I also, and I think it's a great place to close with, Carol. Is I really liked the notion of being able to get the experience, and having promiscuity be seen as something that makes it possible for people to be able to negotiate sexual spaces, rather than to stigmatize that. And I think that's a really, really like uplifting place to end the episode. Is let's make more space for people to get sexual experience and to be able to make mistakes along the way.
And to be able to talk and communicate and be able to fine tune it.
Right.
People need to understand that you can fine tune anything if you pay attention to it and you try to figure out what your partner's experience is, and that's good too.
And I liked that part of your lecture that you pointed out the difference between folks who are homosexual and folks who are heterosexual and the different questions they ask new partners, and if I understood you right, in heterosexual couples or heterosexual encounters, the question of, so what is it you're into, isn't as prevalent.
It's my understanding.
Wow, that's where we should end, because that really we should encourage people to. That would be a great question, like on a first date. So what are the kind of things you enjoy?
Yeah.
So let's do that. When you go on a first date, ask that question. You might have some really awesome answers.
Yeah, don't ask them how many people they've had sex with. Ask them what they're into.
What they're into. Like, make it an experience to have together. So,
Awesome.
So thank you so much for flying all the way here and having the museum be your first stop. You've got a busy weekend.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to have had a chance to have this chat too.
Thank you so much. Awesome. All right, you guys.
See you next time.
So we'll see you next time on Sex Nerd Podcast.